who's in our session today on a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build back on cycling and walking, and talking and having some really interesting innovation. This morning we have Laurence Oakes-Ash presenting from CityScience, Sam Robinson from Love to Ride, Anthony Lau from Cyclehoop, Jeanette Holder from Rediweld Traffic Products, and Tom Bailey from Street Systems. So really exciting participants in our panel today, and looking forward to some great talks. So I'll just start it off and welcome Laurence to the front stage.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Laurence Oakes-Ash, CEO of CityScience, for the opportunity to speak to you today. So this session is all about a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation opportunity to build back better. But in many ways, I think once-in-a-generation understates what we're facing. The truth is the impacts that we're having on the planet are multi-generational. The effects of global warming, the destruction of ecosystems, the destruction of species. There's no way back from these changes. They will persist our lifetime, our children's lifetime, their children and their children. So I want to be clear. The changes that we need to make are more than a once-in-a-generation opportunity. They are a multi-generational necessity. So if you hadn't already guessed, I'm going to be talking about the climate emergency. And yes, I want to be clear about the gravity of the situation we face. But whilst the situation is grave, this is a positive talk. You know, what I'm going to be setting out is a vision for what our places could be like in a zero carbon world. Let's just be clear. It is a necessity, but it's also a fantastic opportunity. So what I'm going to be talking about is some work we've recently completed with the RTPI in collaboration with LDA Design and Vectos. This work really does frame an approach to the climate emergency as an opportunity, setting out a new vision for place-based decarbonisation. Next slide, please. So let's set the scene. Transport is now the largest contributor to carbon emissions in the UK. In an average local authority, transport represents 35% of emissions. And transport has really failed to make any meaningful progress over the last 30 years. So since 1990, transport emissions have fallen by only 3%. That's basically 0.1% per year. Let's compare that to SUV sales, which have recorded consistent double-digit increases, you know, up 22%, up 21%. So what we've been doing to date, what we're doing today is having basically little impact. So what does this mean? Next slide, please. Net zero by 2050 is now set in law. Fantastic. But this still doesn't mean there's no ambiguity in what we should be doing. So this chart depicts 3 different ways you could meet a net zero target by 2050. The DfT implied approach is between 5 to 6% reduction per year. The UN suggests a 7 to 8% reduction per year. And the science-based targets from the Tyndall Centre at the University of Manchester, which are being adopted by some local authorities, these imply a reduction of between 12 and 14% per year. So let's just think about that. A reduction in transport emissions of 12 to 14% every year. I mean, that's huge compared to the 0.1% that we have been managing. Even if it's 5 to 6% per year, that's a seismic change from what we've been doing to date. So it's in this context, the context of these goals, of this step change, that our project set out to understand the implications. Next slide, please. So to understand the implications, we looked in detail at 4 fictional places in the UK, 4 typologies, if you will. Whilst these places were fictional, they were informed by real data, real journey length, real mode shares, real trip purposes, real trends, real growth, and real constraints. So these places are characteristic of places you'll find up and down the country. We've got a large city, a polycentric urbanation, what we call Wootton. We have a unicentric regional centre, a county town or city in the heart of a county. We call that place Castlemore. We have a smaller town that we called Stonebridge, 25,000 people, and a village of 5,000 people called Ebsham. Next slide, please. So in thinking about the carbon emissions and changes that would be needed for each of these places, we followed a simple hierarchy based on the classic avoid, shift, improve framework. But hopefully the headings here are simpler to understand for transport planners. So substituting trips, shifting modes, and switching fuels. So substituting trips, can I make the trip locally? Can I do my desired activity online? Shifting modes, can I walk? Can I cycle? Can I take the bus? Switching fuels. Okay, I've got to make this trip in a private car. How do I make sure that that is zero carbon? Next slide, please. And I think what's really useful about the project as a first step is that we really did try to look at everything. We tried to find the most up-to-date research about all of the different interventions you could make within each of those groupings. And I think that's really important because when we're thinking about carbon, people, local authorities, they always want to know 2 things. 1, what are the key drivers of carbon emissions? And 2, what will the impact of this particular intervention be? So I'll tell you the good news. The good news is we've done a lot of that work as part of this project. It's all available in the resources online. And in doing that, the research, I didn't come across anything like it. So I think it's a great resource. I hope it will be a great resource. But what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is it's really hard. Really hard. I mean, unprecedented. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise given the 0.1% change we've been making, but it is important. Naturally, if we're going to be making big, bold investments, we want to see the evidence of where it's worked in the past, but nowhere has done this before. So this is a really important point and really tied up with how we make decisions in transport planning. To succeed, we're going to need to go beyond what we've done before. We're going to need to go beyond what we've actually got evidence for. Next slide, please. So bearing this all in mind, we've set out a pathway for an 80% reduction in carbon by 2030. That's in line with some of the more ambitious targets that local authorities have adopted. And there's a lot I could say about this pathway. First of all, it's obviously not the only pathway. I think some people will look at it and conclude, maybe correctly, that even this isn't ambitious enough, while others will look at it and say, there's no way that could ever be possible. So I think from an evidence perspective, it is ambitious. It goes beyond the best benchmarks we've already achieved in the UK. And even if we don't do it by 2030, these are the changes that must happen by 2050 if we're going to ensure that we're not just replicating our current car-based approaches with an electric equivalent. That could in itself have huge ecological implications. The other thing I should mention about this pathway is that when we came to the project, we thought we'd have distinctly different pathways for each typology. The reality is that when we crunched the numbers, the pathways were surprisingly similar across all of them. We expected there to be greater diversity in the quantification of impacts, and I guess we found. In layman's terms, then, the conclusion is really do everything approach is the best approach, and every place essentially has to do everything. So whilst the numbers are very similar, the implementations are very different. So let's move on to the visions. Next slide, please. In the report, there's obviously more detail than this, but there's a lot of information about the before and after and some of the spatial plans that show you what types of features there are today and how the places will have changed by 2030. Next slide, please. So the first place we'll look at is Wootton. If you recall, this is our large city of 3 million people. Now, Wootton today has a private car share of 61%. The key thing that we need to do for personal trips is to reduce that mode share to below 40%. Now, that's hard because of the number of trips that are over 5 miles, but certainly not impossible. Zero carbon public transport and e-bikes are clearly part of the solution here, reducing trips and trip lengths through the development of 15-minute neighbourhoods, implementing more car-free areas to promote cycling and walking, but also deterring private cars, and solving the challenge of logistics, which again, I think is actually quite doable because of the existing density. So I don't think there's anything hugely radical for Wootton, with many large cities already progressing many of these types of initiatives. It's just the pace and scale of the change that needs to be accelerated. Next slide, please. But things change dramatically when you get to a place like Castlemore. Castlemore itself has a mode share similar to Wootton today, but the outlying towns create significant commuting traffic, which all converges into Castlemore's centre. Making walking and cycling a priority in Castlemore is a lot more challenging. The number of trips being walked today is actually surprisingly high, but the carbon emissions are driven largely by those longer distance commuting trips that are predominantly private car. In places like Castlemore, we need to make it much easier not to commute, not to travel into the centre, to find everything you need within the natural commuter belt so that people can live car-free. To do this is going to require both improved infrastructure and deterrence to private car use through both restrictions and the provision of mobility hubs. We're going to need improved infrastructure. We're going to need to make sure that, more than anything, we've got political leadership, the right powers and a pace of change that doesn't come naturally to some of the big infrastructure projects we're used to. Next slide, please. So in my view, Castlemore's hard because it's already struggling politically to make even the most basic changes. But Stoneborough is even harder. Stoneborough's mode share today is 81% private vehicles. And the average trip lengths that we're reporting here actually hide a long tail of carbon emissions. In fact, 80% of the carbon from personal trips is coming from journeys over 20 kilometres. But that car dependency can't deter us from making some bold changes. A car-free town centre, much more focus on core regional routes provided by e-bikes, bus and rail with improved levels of service, providing much greater direct connectivity. That will also likely mean reallocating priority road space to these modes. So Castlemore is going to be harder. Stoneborough is going to be harder. But then the final place typology is Evesham. So next slide, please. Remember, Evesham's a village of 5,000 people. Again, today, Evesham has about an 80% private vehicle mode share. And in Evesham, about 90% of the carbon from personal trips is coming from journeys greater than 20 kilometres. Again, we're going to need to cut that dramatically. We know where the desire lines are. We know where the people in Evesham are trying to go. And so to enable that mobility, we need a much greater focus on those strategic regional mobility corridors. And again, to do this in a way that those routes will be attractive, we'll need to repurpose secondary county roads away from private cars. So yes, none of these are easy solutions. It's not going to be easy getting there for any of these places. But I think what's most important is that these visions for these places in 2030, I mean, these are places that I would want to live. The benefits of these place-based visions, go way beyond carbon. These are healthier places. They're safer places. They're attractive places. They're happier places. There's a greater sense of community. They're more connected to their natural environment. And this is what designing places and placemaking is all about. Next slide, please. So I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot more in the report itself. As I said, it came out just yesterday. You can find the link here. And if you've got any questions and you want to find out more, you can also email me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Laurence. That was really interesting, and I look forward to reading through that report. I forgot my excitement that I didn't introduce myself. My name is Dayan. I'm a cycling walking development officer at Transport for West Midlands, and our next speaker is Sam Robinson from Love to Ride.
Thank you, Hannah. I hope it's great to be here. I'm really glad actually that although this app is great, it doesn't quite replace the conferences that we've all attended over the years, because there's nothing better than getting together with people from this sector in person. Anyway, so 10 minutes to whiz through a few slides for you here. So next slide, please. Love to Ride, as I'm sure you're very aware, is a cycling behavior change platform that's proven to get more people riding bikes. Next slide, please. It's been a really fascinating 9 months for us, apart from the fact that we moved office a couple of days before the first lockdown was introduced, and we've never really returned. We've also seen an incredibly busy time in the UK and a lot of changes. And obviously, not just in cycling uptake, that's very well documented, but also changes in travel behavior that we weren't expecting. If you could go back a slide, please. Changes in travel behavior that we weren't expecting, and also changes in working patterns. And we've got used to seeing people's backgrounds of them working in their children's bedrooms or in their lofts. And that's something that's likely to be around for some time. And I Love to Ride, what we're particularly interested in is how these changes can be manipulated and grabbed hold of, so that we can really start to see some big significant changes in the type of people that we engage and the behaviors that we enable them to take up. So we've seen huge increases in the levels of new riders, as I'll show you in a minute. We did a big survey back in May last year that looked at people's perceived changes as a result of lockdown, sort of looking ahead, and it's quite interesting to look back on them. And this is of those people taking public transport. How might they travel to work if public transport wasn't an option? Great to see such a high proportion of people who are willing to bike. We also have seen really high levels of social engagement through the platforms that we deliver around the country. And it's been really interesting to see how some of the new features we've developed have really taken into their own. Next slide, please. Just very quickly on this slide, and this is just a kind of evidence. If you could move, thanks. A couple of graphs here, UK on the left, global on the right. The green band in the middle the red band at the bottom represents the new riders. It's great to see the new and occasional riders, proportion of all participants in our programs really jump up significantly this year. That's compared to the last 3 years. And that is evident in the attendance levels that we're getting in some of the seasonal promotions that we deliver as part of the national cycling behaviour change programme that we deliver in the UK. Next slide, please. But what changes have we made? Well, we've been really lucky in that we've managed to increase the size of the team a bit based on the amount of work that's come our way to be able to successfully develop these projects and also deliver them. And we've been able to make some quite significant changes to the way that we deliver our programs around storytelling, which was mentioned earlier by Adam and others, and I think Will Norman, as an incredibly important part of the future of this change is to encourage people to share their stories. It's a big win for us in peer encouragement, and also program and delivery evolution. I'll come to that in a minute. We've been incredibly successful at delivering some great online awareness sessions to bridge the gap between people who tell us they're not confident in cycling and accessing some of that local cycle confidence training that might not be happening. And these sessions have regularly been attended by 200, 300, sometimes 400 people. It's a great way in 30 minutes to share some basic cycling skills with people. We've made some simple tweaks, which I'll show you. And we've also continued to engage with businesses, despite the fact that those businesses are not operational as they used to be. And the community and support that we've delivered through the programs in our cities has been fantastic. And our local project managers have engaged with things like getting bikes to NHS workers and supporting other community groups who are working in the sector. Next slide, please. We've talked about storytelling, and it really is just worth just stopping here for 1 minute. It's a very rich feature of our websites, and we've seen, as I said, a really quite dramatic increase in the number of people that are willing to share and tell their stories. And as a peer encouragement opportunity, there's really nothing as powerful as this. We will be doing more with this. It's a great way to interact with people, and all of our city-based projects have this functionality. We've also made some simple changes, like the way that you can, next slide, the way that you can select the type of ride that you do, so that when we're gathering all that rich data on people who are riding, we can look at riding with kids now, and also indoor rides, which was in response to demand, although of course we encourage people to get outdoors as much as possible. Next slide, please. So what are we doing with programming? Well, last year, Ride to Work Week didn't happen. It was called Ride Anywhere Week. And since then, all of our seasonal programs that we deliver to engage and support and encourage people to ride more have never been as well attended as they have been over the last 9 months. So new for March this year, we have a program called Ride It Out. This is hot off the press. We've literally just in the last week or two developed this process and this program, and it's all about focusing on encouraging people to ride for different reasons, whether it's ride healthy, ride relaxed, ride green, or ride dare, and to really tap into the different motivations and also to address some of the barriers that people put up to why they might cycle more. Next slide, please. Developing our program is something we continue to do, and it's obviously an incredibly important part of what we do. And we also do that in partnership with others. And I think that it's really important now in this really fantastic sector that we're all lucky to work in, to really grab the opportunity to collaborate more and to focus in on the specialisms that each of our organizations and the professional individuals in the sector have. And we've got some fantastic partnerships, really wide-ranging ones, starting with our local authority clients, with whom we work very closely, through to more recent national collaborative efforts from Sport England and obviously Bike is Best. And you've all heard from Adam Tranter and the great work they're doing with marketing cycling to people in the UK as an ongoing opportunity. Next slide, please. And we've got some exciting news for this year. So we're developing a new app, and we've been developing this for about 12 months now. We're going to be launching this later in the year. And this is really to look at developing the data that we collect to be able to demonstrate to cities and regions that we work with the impact of the behavior change activity that we're delivering, to be able to monitor the impact of the local infrastructure developments that we're seeing, and also to be able to inform some of those changes. And we sell this almost as the kind of the Fitbit for cycling, if you like. So imagine it as a way of factoring in all of those cycle rides, whether it's riding to work, potentially, whether it's just riding to get around, riding to the shops, riding to meet a friend, whatever your bike ride is, riding with kids, we're picking up all of that data. And when we underlie that with all of the demographic data that we also collect at Love to Ride, we've got a really rich data source there. The idea being here that we obviously collect this data within cities and regions, and we're able then to present that to our local authority partners and other regional transport authority partners to be able to demonstrate the way that we're working. So next slide, please. There's a few screenshots here to show you. The great thing about this app is automated cycle trip tracking. So you don't have to remember to grab your phone out of your pocket. We will still be engaging with third-party apps such as Strava. We will be encouraging everyone to use this, obviously, because it's automated and we're picking up that data in a very sort of simple way, and then working with councils to be able to demonstrate what we can do with that data to help inform them. Next slide, please. And a really useful feature that we're testing heavily at the moment is the Rate Your Routes. And this is a cycle friendliness kind of heat map, if you like, of cycling in your area. And we've already talked about some of the great sort of pop-up cycle lanes that have been done and some of the changes that have been made in local areas. What we're going to be doing with this is actually monitoring and tracking the impact that they're having on behaviours in active travel in those areas. So a very exciting development. Next slide, please. And obviously for the city partners and others that we work with, a great opportunity to actually look in a live way, ultimately in a dashboard sort of scenario where we can see the impact of that work in the cities in which we're working. Next slide, please. I wanted to just touch on health, and this has been mentioned a little bit. I think it was Sarah Story in the plenary session who mentioned that activity has kind of been planned out of our lives, and I think that's absolutely true. And it's really important to understand the cost of inactivity in the UK. There's some numbers on here and a quote from Adam Baker, who's a public health physical activity lead in Suffolk, one of our newer project areas, who understand the importance of engaging with people and changing behaviour to be able to have an impact. And also that takes time, and actually achieving behaviour change is relatively complex work and can take some time to get right, which is why a lot of our programs now are in their third, fourth, fifth, some of them sixth year, as people come and go. And as they go through the cycle, excuse the pun, of, you know, the seasonal interventions that will support them, encourage them, address the barriers they tell us they have, and ultimately, in a measurable way, affect levels of behaviour change that will have an impact in the local area and help to create this spaces for people opportunity that we all would like to see. Next slide, please. And just to finish up, there's a few statistics from our own activity here in how we motivate for activity, and the importance of, going back to storytelling for a moment, the importance of sharing stories through our platform and engaging people in other ways to be able to address some of those issues and share the impacts of cycling amongst others. Ooh, and as you could all hear, that was my timer to say my time was up. So I'm going to leave it there, dead on 10 minutes. But yeah, really happy to take any questions at the end. Back over to you in the driving seat, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Sam. So interesting, and especially how important the storytelling is. A couple of us commenting on the storytelling. You can't be what you cannot see. So really important to share all those stories, especially for those harder to reach groups. We seem to have lost our, there we go, sharing. Thank you, Mark, our expert. Next up is Anthony Lau, founder and design director from Cyclehoop. Take it away. Anthony, are you still there?
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Can you all see and hear me? Fantastic. It's a real pleasure to be here today as part of the cycling and walking. We're super excited to be able to share some of our latest ideas and innovations. As you know, over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic really accelerated government plans to transform streets and create more livable cities. The rapid rollout of temporary infrastructure.
Anthony, audio keeps dropping out.
Oh, okay. Let me that, is it okay now, or is it still dropping in and out?
It still keeps dropping away, like you're going sort of, like you're moving away to your camera, your mic, and back out again.
Apologies. Let me see if I can. Sorry about this. I think it was working earlier on, but.
Anthony, we're going to move on to the next speaker. We'll come back after that speaker, okay?
Yep, that's fine. Anthony's going to work through our tech. Nothing is always 100% perfect in this new world we live in right now, but no worries. We'll come back to Anthony, and let me introduce Jeanette Holder, General Manager from Rediweld Traffic Products, to talk about from pop-up to permanent. Very
It's lovely, Hannah. Thank you very much. And like Anthony was saying earlier, it's very nice to be involved in this. The lighting, a bit like a technical fault with Anthony. Unfortunately, we've had a power surge and we've lost all the power. So I'm now lighted up with mobile phones. So sorry about the change of lighting. So obviously we've had some really good sessions that we've seen earlier today, talking about temporary pop-up schemes, and there's been a lot of questions about how we can now look at making those permanent. And I'm going to talk about some of the products that we've been have installed over the last year as another consideration to actually implement some of these schemes and make them permanent. Next slide, please. So just sort of as a review, really, as we saw, a lot of measures were implemented last year. They were fast-tracked through. We saw a lot of local authorities looking at risk areas, identifying key points where they needed to implement the infrastructure. These consisted of high pedestrian volumes causing bottlenecks, bus stop areas. We saw the increase of widening pavements, being able to create areas for better pedestrian movement without anybody being restricted. And obviously we saw the introduction of the LTNs, the low traffic neighbourhoods. And we saw width restrictions and obviously residential streets closed off to vehicles, which enabled a lot of residential people to use their streets more regularly, and for the children to play safely without the worry about cars and vehicles coming through. Next slide, please. So I know Will spoke about this in his presentation this morning. The first real scheme that hit the streets was the scheme in Brixton, where they actually incorporated the new widened pavement. And this one was actually very successful, hit the media, lots of social media talk about this particular project. It was installed within 24 hours, went in very quick and easy. The product that was used was our Rediweld HV curbing, which is a recycled curb manufactured from recycled truck tyres. So it offers you an environmental aspect as well by using tyres for alternative measures. It's flexible. It can be provided in different colours. This particular is black and white, so it's very distinctive. The white markings are moulded in at time of manufacture, so they don't peel and flake off. So again, give a good durability of the product, even if that is now left as a permanent structure, which it certainly can be. It doesn't have to be removed. Next slide, please. So some other measures that were involved, utilising a lot of these products, was the Park Lane scheme, where we saw the pop-up cycle lane. This consisted a number of our products. Again, the Rediweld was used to create this new build-out area for bus stops, as you can see on the top picture. And the one-piece one-dorker, which has been very well received, enabled a quick and effective cycle lane within Park Lane. And these have the 1 metre high pole cones to provide horizontal as well as the vertical measures, and the tape is reflective as well. Next slide, please. Some of the other measures that you may have seen around London. So top left is the scheme that we worked with for Camden, where we provided the one-piece one-dorkers. At the time, it was a case of everybody was pulling as much of these products as possible, trying to get hold of anything they can that they wanted to use to utilise safety within the residential and public areas. So this particular scheme has a 650 high pole cone, but it will do exactly the same as the previous ones that you've seen earlier. The curbing has been used at many locations, providing, as I said, widened pavements, new bus stop areas, and you can see a number of applications. In Dublin as well, they've been utilising the same products in there for the social distancing and being able to keep people safe within this pandemic. We've also been involved with width restrictions. So this is where you get your low traffic neighbourhoods. This bottom one is installed in Kingston. We did a couple of these. It incorporated signs, lighted columns, bollards, and we can do that very easily with our products. And the middle picture is an Enfield where they've actually used our curbing, because obviously a lot of these planters were being hit by vehicles and moving. And by creating a barrier of our rubber curb, it actually allowed the planters to actually stay still without actually being hit and causing an obstruction. So another way of perhaps thinking about some of the schemes that have been implemented. Next slide, please. So moving on from obviously a lot of these temporary schemes, we now want to sort of consider how we can make these schemes more permanent. Well, our products are exactly that. They are ideal for temporary schemes, temporary layouts, but they give you the benefit that you can actually just leave them in as permanent. They don't have to be removed. They will perform the same as traditional material. They don't crack and break if they get clipped by vehicles, and they can provide very distinctive schemes. And we've worked with many local authorities throughout the UK providing these products. We've worked with the Milestone, which you can see in the middle photo with the cyclist. That's in Kingston, along Kingston Hill. Manchester have used the Wandorka, which is the bottom left picture. Gloucestershire have utilised our Ready Pave Islands with lighted columns and signposts and that sort of thing. The products come as standard as black. However, we can actually offer a granite effect to our products to make them more pleasing, especially for urban areas or residential areas and things like that. Okay, next slide, please. Some other schemes, just to give you a bit of variety, to show you that, you know, that the products can be left as permanent. The top left is a scheme that we actually did with Southampton Airport, and they actually looked at using traditional curbing to install a particular layout that they wanted to implement, but it was very costly, very time consuming, and because of the nature of an airport being extremely busy, they wanted to utilise something quick and easy, and that's where our products were installed. The curbing was used to create the new layout and different infill options with stone, asphalt, and which you can actually see at the airport. They're modular, so they can actually suit any different widths restraints without compromising strength and durability. Yes, they're modular, but if they get clipped, they don't pop apart. They are very, very strong. Product life, typically 8 years plus. I mean, in some areas, we still have some of our very early speed cushions on the highway, which are over 15 years old, so they do last. As I mentioned earlier, we can do different colours, granite, grey, black or red. We can utilise them to you know, do various schemes and projects. We've seen various things over the years. The bottom left is actually a build out area for having a coffee outside in Glasgow, and they've utilised again our curbing. Next slide, please. I wanted to put this slide in because, you know, we always get that question, is how durable is our product? So this is a really good example. This is a scheme that was installed in Swindon, and it was temporary for 1 year. We installed the curb line, as you can see at the top, and around the roundabout, we extended it outwards and provided pole cones to provide vertical measures. This was installed because this particular location was very notorious for accidents, and they wanted to see, by extending and pushing the curb line out, whether we'd actually have an effect of reducing the accident. And it was very successful, and it did the job. This, if you Google this particular location, you can still see it. It's actually still in place, exactly the same. Hasn't moved. Still with our curbing. They have backfilled the curbing slightly and allowed little gaps for drainage, but the scheme is still there. It's permanent. It's 8 years old. And I don't think there's any plans yet to take that out or change it to traditional. So it does really show you the durability of our products. Okay, next slide, please. So just to sort of, you know, summarize, obviously identifying schemes that have worked well and how these can be utilized with the existing products is key. We've heard lots of various measures. Removing some of the old temporary cheaper products that have been installed, like the red and white plastic barriers, the cheaper bollards that don't tend to last. You know, you can use our products and, you know, guarantee that, you know, a few years down the line, they're still installed and providing exactly what they're installed to do. As I mentioned, they're manufactured from recycled rubber. So this does offer your environmental aspect, especially when we're trying to save the planet and everything, you know, with the climate change and everything. So, you know, it's another way of utilising an alternative measure. The products can be installed on bridges. If you've got limited depth, we could provide shorter, unique fixings that actually cater for that. So we've done a lot of work on bridges, depth restraints. We've done curbing actually on Tower Bridge, where actually on the lift up ramp area. So, you know, we can utilise quite a bit of our our skill and our knowledge to provide suitable things. The other consideration that I wanted to mention was also with these type of products, they're classed as curbs, so they sit within cycle lanes. They should sit up to the white line, because the white line indicates the edge of carriageway. So it's quite key when we're talking to local authorities, clients, engineers, consultants. We do try and guide them in the way that we recommend these type of products being installed. We've got all our method statements available on our website. We can provide CAD drawings for all of our products, and we've got a YouTube channel. So if you want to see these products being driven over and show the durability, you can click on there as well. And all of our products can be seen on our website. So I look forward to answering any questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Jeanette. Such a interesting set of products, and I love that they come in color, so that definitely makes sort of roadscapes much more appealing visually. I think we have Anthony back. Are you back? Yes, you're working with a headset. I'm not sure. I can't hear you. Can anyone else?
He's on mute. He's on mute.
Okay. You need to unmute yourself, Anthony. Oh, I think we've lost him again. Okay, so should we just keep moving on, Mark?
Moving on the slides now. Just
okay.
Bear with me for a moment.
Anthony, we're gonna move on to the next speaker, and we'll have you in as the last speaker, if that's okay. So let me introduce Tom Bailey, Director of Street Systems, to speak to us about supporting active travel through technology. Welcome, Tom.
Hi everyone, good afternoon from Newcastle. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. So I suppose if we move on to the first slide, please, Mark. Well, hey, there we are. So I suppose it's been a very funny year for all of us. When I was putting this presentation together, it almost just started to slip into a kind of chronological story. So I just kind of went with that in the end. Next slide. Street Systems, we're a data company based up in Newcastle. And I suppose, in a simplistic level, we produce data which is derived from video footage, either as sort of permanent equipment or, what the majority of what we did before last March was going out to locations around the country, like this one in London that you can see on screen, in particular locations where there are very, very high numbers of pedestrians, and extracting data sets to support change. Next slide. And I suppose we were doing that right up until March of last year. What you're looking at now is a representation of a day's pedestrian movement on a junction in Manchester. And I suppose the more keenly observant amongst you will spot the sort of date stamp at the top of that frame. And this is from March 13th, which I suppose was in practice the last normal day in Manchester city centre or just about anywhere else in the UK. But we were there for sort of 3 or 4 days. By the time we came to the next day, which was Saturday the 14th, footfall had already started to drop away as these sort of cataclysmic announcements were coming on the telly every day, even before we actually went into lockdown. So I suppose we've had to think again really about what data means and how we support design, given that most cases just going into a location for a few days doesn't really tell you anything much in some cases at the moment, just because patterns of movement are varying so much from day to day or month to month. And I suppose one solution to that is in a way what you can see on screen, in that, you know, although numbers of people, numbers of vehicles may change, patterns of behaviour don't necessarily change. So how people cross the road may well be consistent. Next screen. So next slide, Mark. I suppose as we got into the joys of COVID, we started to look at video analysis of social distancing, and I suppose this was one of our earlier attempts. Next slide, please. And I suppose we eventually sort of discarded trying to look at individual behaviour as just being a bit too complicated, really, and ended up spending quite a lot of the time looking at developing a more simplified device which could be deployed on street to look at the density of pedestrian activity in an area. And what you're seeing on screen now is just a quick demo in terms of how we set that up. And I suppose the advantage of density as a measure is it's very, very straightforward. You know, in a way, crowding is the problem in urban areas that at this point in time, which is the last year, when high streets were starting to reopen, was what people felt they needed to look at. Next slide. While we were doing this and sort of testing in locations around Newcastle, we also started to look at locations where the city had come in and intervened and made changes to increase space for either walking or cycling. You know, and looking at sort of the patterns of usage, we learned quite a few lessons in terms of what we feel works and doesn't work in that context. Unfortunately, the amount of monitoring that was going on a lot of these projects was almost non-existent in a lot of cases, which resulted in some good things being ripped out, unfortunately, in our view. But I think people are going to come back to this as we get into March and April, and hopefully we start to see city centres reviving again. Next slide. I personally spent most of the March lockdown sort of on rooftops around Newcastle city centre, installing more permanent equipment to monitor footfall, which was pretty bizarre at times. Felt like the set of The Walking Dead at points, with just a few joggers and strange folk like myself wandering around the city centre. But as locations started to open up again, the sort of very long-term data sets started to come into their own. I mean, what you're looking at here is the effectiveness of sort of one-way measures for pedestrians in city centres, you know, which unusually, I think, for a lot of locations, did actually work in this particular scenario, because you can sort of see long-term patterns of movement shaded in the background, and then what was going on in response to unidirectional measures highlighted in blue and red, and public behaviour was adapting. Next slide. The downside, I suppose, of that perhaps was that we also saw a long-term decline in the effectiveness of measures like that. And again, I suppose we've got an example there of, you know, data is great, but it's only great if people actually look at it and understand and seek to understand what's going on. And I suppose, unfortunately, what you can kind of see there is public apathy building through last summer, you know, which may well have been reflected in other sorts of behaviour around the city. And I think one of the things that we kind of expect to happen in March and April is perhaps local authorities will try and be more sophisticated this time out, and sort of try and track public attitudes, you know, not only through measures like this, but also behavioural surveys. Next slide. I suppose we went down to Merthyr in South Wales once high streets were opened up again, and in that location we were sort of working with Sustrans, looking at opportunities to improve things for walking and cycling. And I suppose, we've seen a lot of very urban examples of pop-up cycleways in some of the stuff that other people have shown. But I think in Merthyr's problem was, partly about the way the high street was functioning, but also about the way sort of very large roundabout junctions either side of the city centre were performing and acting as barriers for walking and cycling. And you could well argue that what this town needs or needed was not pop-up cycleways, but attempts to address those sorts of locations. Next slide. That's gone back rather than forwards. There we are. So one of the things we did at this large junction, and I suppose it immediately sprang to mind when we looked at Jeanette's products in use during her presentation, was we tracked the wheels of vehicles on this very large junction, which actually was only about 200 yards away from the high street in the town centre in Merthyr. And what we were attempting to do there was to look at the scale of the underused sections of carriageway, as well as measuring the speed of vehicles as they come in close proximity to pedestrians. And so that kind of brings me back to the point earlier that, could we say absolutely that traffic volumes or pedestrian volumes, at that point in time in Merthyr were representative? No, we can't. But patterns of behaviour and the way that vehicles behave, the way pedestrians behave, those are useful in the longer term. Next slide. Patterns can be quantified as well. This was something that Newcastle Urban Observatory did with some of our data, looking at public space in Newcastle. And again, just quantifying how at different times of the day, different movements become stronger or weaker in a public space. And I suppose that, when we were working on this initially, we saw it as a long-term design tool. But I think as we sort of respond to changes now, shorter term measures of how patterns are changing can be very useful. Next slide. One thing that we've had to do during the, I suppose in a way, the new world that we found ourselves in is focus much more on longer term measuring. What you're looking at there, which is a vision-based sensor, I wouldn't even really call it a camera because it doesn't record any imagery, it just records numbers. It contains pretty much the same nuts and bolts as some of the devices that we showed earlier on. Next slide. And what we mostly be doing with those in Newcastle is recording data from the council on the function of traffic filters. And I suppose, there's a long-term benefit to that in terms of looking at changes in behaviour, but there's also a very strong short-term benefit in that it enables an immediate answer to the sorts of challenges that we see. No one rides a bike there, no one walks through that space, when very evidently they do. And we can produce very long-term anonymised data sets which tell you that. I mean, I stress we're not recording footage normally in locations like this. We're just recording numbers and patterns rather than what individuals are up to. Next slide. I'll just finish on kind of one of the more unusual projects we've had on the go. Last year we did a research project for the Department for Transport, which was about working on problems with pedestrians crossing cycleways at bus stops where the users are visually impaired. And what we ended up doing was sort of building and testing a system which could tell blind and partially sighted pedestrians whether a cyclist was approaching the crossing point or not. So in a way, not changing how a zebra crossing functions, but providing information which enables the user to then make a decision to assert their priority on a zebra crossing over a cycleway. And I suppose that's one of our projects that's been most disrupted by COVID, in that ideally we now would have a sort of fully functioning test site running, most likely in Newcastle, where our the user groups that work with us could come along and sort of experiment with that and tell us what they think of it. And unfortunately that's got to wait until after the end of this lockdown. But I think to us, it just seemed a logical extension to the use of this sort of technology. If anyone's ever tried to work with radar in this sort of context, it's very, very difficult to produce sensible numbers and sensible triggers. When you've got, when cycle tracks don't move and aren't laid out in straight lines. So I'm sure I've gone way over my 10 minutes now. So we'll just flick on to the last slide, Mark, which just takes us back to Merthyr, I think. And I'll leave it there. Hopefully people feel free to come and have a chat afterwards, and we can sort of share some of our experiences in more detail.
Thank you, Tom. Really, really, really interesting, and of course, capturing data on our ATF programs is quite interesting, as well as beyond ATF. Even our business as usual should be capturing useful data. Anthony, you have a solution.
I'm back now, and hopefully my face next to the screen, you can all hear me. Is that
Thank you.
better?
Welcome.
Great. Nice to be back. We'll jump straight into the slides then. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So yes, I'm Anthony. I'm founder and design director of Cyclehoop. We're a forward-thinking cycle parking company. Our most influential designs are the Cyclehoop that converts existing street furniture into cycle parking, and our bike hangers that are on-street cycle sheds. We've seen a huge increase in the demand for cycle parking throughout the pandemic. There's been a 400% increase in demand for bike hanger spaces, and our waiting list is now around has been increased to about 50,000 people. So there's a huge and growing demand for parking that's not being met, and as we know, the lack of secure or available cycle parking is one of the biggest inhibitors to the growth of cycling. Next slide, please. We're always designing new products and new ways to enable more people to ride bikes. On a larger scale, we've created cycle hubs at train stations, such as the one on the left for Enfield Council. But we also like doing fun projects, fun custom projects. On the right is a shipping container we converted into a mini cycle hub in Waltham Forest. Next slide, please. So today I'm really excited to be able to unveil our latest innovation, the Mobility Corral. So I'd like to share with you a brief story about the creative process behind this idea. It's something that can be quickly and safely used to convert road space into cycle parking, helping to support active travel whilst freeing up vital pavement space for pedestrians. Next slide, please. So here it is, the Mobility Corral. It's the first product of its kind that's flexible, which can support a wide range of micro-mobility types, from bicycles to scooters to cargo bikes and all-ability cycles. It's based on the concept of a corral where three sides are protected. It's modular, it can be reconfigured and expanded in any number of ways. So it basically replaces all the highways and safety functions of traditional infrastructure without the need for groundworks, so that councils can quickly deliver infrastructure on a budget. Next slide, please. It's an idea we've been thinking about for a while. It evolved from some of our earlier products. This is our well-known car-shaped bike rack, which converted 10 space from one car parking space. It was designed back in 2010. It was our first foray into reappropriating road space. We wanted to design that was bold, made a statement, even if it was slightly controversial. We used lots of colors, it was playful, and it really tried to encourage behavior change whilst demonstrating the space efficiency of bikes. However, this was a bit of a statement piece of cycle parking. It wasn't a solution for everywhere. So we wanted to make something that was more subtle, that captured all the features of the car bike port and more. Next slide, please. We had a look at other cities in Europe where cycling is an everyday activity, just to see how bicycles were organized. I was really inspired to see streets lined with bikes, such as the image on the left, where bike parking is convenient, it's right on your doorstep. However, this could get messy. It would sometimes cluster up pavements, especially in older neighborhoods. We strongly believe cycle parking should be on the carriageway. This is critical as cities get busier in order to reduce street clutter and maintain space for walking. On the right is a typical residential street in the UK lined with cars. So comparing the two, you can kind of see how in our cities, motorized traffic really dominates our streets. Cars take up so much space, and if we can reallocate that space, there will be plenty of space to accommodate all our cycle parking needs. Next slide, please. So we continue to play with the idea of what future cycle infrastructure could look like. This is a design we did for an international design competition a few years back. It had the early elements of the Mobility Corral, where the signage, where the lighting, all the racking was integrated into a single structure. We wanted something that you could just bolt down in a few points, so that's easy to install and wouldn't trap rubbish and leaves. But it was a bit too modern at the time, so we went back to the drawing boards. Next slide, please. So moving on to the present day, how do we install cycle parking on the carriageway safely in streets that are still dominated by cars? So right now, the method is quite costly and time consuming. You have to concrete stands into the ground, build outs and put bollards in to make sure the racks are protected from cars. You have to add signage and road markings. So there's a lot of clutter in these kind of designs. They cost around £3,000 or maybe a day and a half of labor just to install 10 to 12 cycle spaces. So this type of solution can be costly and slow to deliver. So we need to have a better way to quickly respond to the mobility challenges that our cities are going through right now. Next slide, please. So last year, in the early months of COVID, there was a wave of temporary solutions, including some of these temporary cycle racks. Although they're quick and affordable, they didn't really offer the protection for the users or the bikes. As you can tell, it seems the official way to park a car is to try and reverse until you hit something and then reverse a bit more. And that's how people park. And also these temporary solutions didn't really cater for the new wave of people who are cycling, such as families using cargo bikes. Next slide. So back to the drawing board, we wanted to create an on-street parking system that could organize and protect a wide range of mobility solutions. It needs to be flexible, expandable, easy to build and take apart in case demand changes. It should be pop-up cycle parking, but it should also be designed as a permanent piece of street furniture that can fit into the streetscape. Perhaps it can even integrate other pop-up solutions like parklets, link up with pop-up cycle lanes, expanded pavement schemes, and so forth. Next slide. So key to this project was looking at the cost and time. So we did a very basic initial cost and time analysis. Using a kind of corral concept, you can save 85% on installation time, as well as 30% on cost of installation and materials. So there's significant time and cost savings if you do it in a different way. And at the same time, we were developing the Mobility Corral. Council was looking at ways to trial, ways to protect and organize dockless bikes and e-scooters in all the new schemes that were popping up. So we'd previously done some of this with our colorful car bike ports. So we wanted the corral to also serve this function. Next slide, please. As the pandemic progressed, cycling, we saw a huge dramatic increase in cycle numbers as people cycled to try and avoid public transport. Many cities and business districts were looking for ways to support and encourage cycling so that their staff can get to work. So the momentum was really building, and we were really rushing to finalize and build prototypes for our first Mobility Corral. Next slide, please. So finally, we found an ideal opportunity to trial one of these. We were working at the time with New West End Business Improvement District, a bid in central London, who had hired some of our bike ports to provide temporary parking for their workers in the West End. So it was a perfect time to introduce the idea of the corral. We showed them some of the prototypes. They were very keen to get one installed with some of the planting you can see there. So we've got to say big thanks to Stephen Will from the bid in helping making this project happen, and also Westminster City Council for trialling it. There's one of these down on Barrett Street by Selfridges if you want to have a look. Next slide, please. So since then, we've been installing more corrals and trying different sites out. Here's one we did as part of a mini parklet that we installed in a low emission neighborhood in Southwark. And we're currently talking to another council who are looking to install dockless bikes across their dockless bike corrals across their borough over the next 2 years. So we're looking for more locations for corrals. So if you have any suggestions, please get in touch. A recent survey showed that 8 out of 10 people really support measures to reduce road traffic, and 2/3 support reallocating road space for active travel. So we need to keep this momentum going, and we believe our latest innovation can play an important role enabling people to choose active travel. So finally, if it works, I'd like to show you the launch video of the Mobility Corral. Let's see if this plays. Great. So I hope you heard my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed the ideas we have. Thanks for your time. If you want to try one, please get in touch. We also have a stand at a virtual exhibition booth, so drop by and say hi to my colleagues Gavin and Hamish there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and well worth the wait. The parklet is brilliant. Love that idea of putting up the benches in by where you park, stop for cafe stop. Has a whole new meaning that way. So thank you so much, and thank you to all our panelists for speaking today. There have been a few questions. Some questions have been answered, but I'm going to scroll way back towards the beginning of our panel. There were some questions addressed to Sam and Love to Ride. So Sam, you're still here?
I'm here.
So Vanessa and Carolyn have asked about the difference between the Love to Ride app and say something like Strava.
Okay.
Carlton Lord asked about sharing data. Will it be open, or is it something through a subscription? And I think there have been a few questions on where can they get more information on the Ride It Out campaign. And I think someone asked, yes, and Ruth asked about how can they hire you? How does the council go about hiring you? So I can remind you all the questions
first, I think.
Yeah.
I have actually responded to all of those questions directly, but for the purposes of other people, just quickly, the Love to Ride app is very different. We integrate with Strava. We will continue to do that, but the Love to Ride app, the main difference being it's everyday cycling, and that's absolutely the mantra at Love to Ride, is encouraging not only accessibility to cycling from all groups, but those everyday cycle rides, and the fact that it's fully automated. So you link it once, you put it away, you don't think about it. That means the data that we're capturing is every cycle journey that's taken, and that's the important thing. We want to pick up all of those ones. The long weekend rides, yes, for the regular riders, but absolutely the local shorter rides as well. And on the sharing data, it's a massive investment for us, this obviously, and we're working with quite a lot of funding partners in the UK, as in councils for whom we deliver cycling behaviour change projects right around the year, with Active Travel Fund and Access Fund and other funding from public health. Initially, obviously, we'll be opening up this data to those clients of ours. But longer term, obviously, the opportunity is there for us to work more closely with a wider group of people with the richness of this data that we have. And then just finally, if whoever asked the question about can we hire you, yes, please, if you want to drop me an email, sam@lovetoride.net, I'd be very happy to set up a meeting. And can I just really quickly say, it's fantastic to see what Cyclehoop are doing. We've worked with Cyclehoop for the last 6 years as sponsors of our activity. I really think actually that solution is a great answer to some of the issues that councils have. So we look forward to continuing to work with you, Anthony.
Thanks so much, Sam. Jeanette, I know you've been answering some of those questions already. Ben asked about the lifespan of materials compared to traditional, and Ruth asked, which I saw your answer to, about orcas being installed inside the line, making narrow cycle lanes even narrower. And Kathy asked if they can be recycled at the end of life. And finally, Paul asked about cleaning the ones. I think you're muted. You're Jeanette.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. So in regards to afterlife, the products can be. There was a company that we used to use down in Cornwall that used to be able to chop all the old rubber modules up, and it would go into the equestrian market and used in the horse arenas. So yes, there is an end of life option for our type of products. In regards to cleaning of the pole cones, I know visibility and the dirt from the road grime can be an issue. We have actually got a new coating that we can actually incorporate with the pole cones. It's called a fluorine coating. And basically it's like a self-cleaning, so when it rains it actually washes away. It also reduces scuff marks and marks on the products as well to offer more visibility. So I will respond, and if anybody wants a particular information on that, then obviously just drop me an email and we can certainly get that across to you. In terms of lifespan, and compared to traditional materials. I mean, we, as I said earlier in the presentation, we do have products that are over 15 years old. They obviously will break down at some point, but it's rubber, so it's like car tires, and we all know how long car tires last. So they will be around for a long time unless they are, utilized and used in other applications. And also, obviously, the benefit with rubber as well is it doesn't crack and break like traditional. So if it does get clipped by a curb, it absorbs the impact. So it does offer a lot of durability. You don't get any wheel damage, no claims is what we all like. So it does give you that benefit. And what was the other one?
I think that was it, but there was an additional question. Is there any pollution for the fact that they're recycled tires? Because we always hear about tires causing some of the particulates and air quality. Do you have that same issue from this recycled tire product?
Not really, because it's formed into a product. It's there, so there's no. I think, over a period of time, if there is a particular product that gets scuffed or worn over an area, I know that we had an island in London that was run over regularly by a bus for about 15 years. It will wear down and cause a dust, but it's very rare. It's not something that is particularly known. So I would say no, really. And then just quickly about Ruth's information, she was asking about products being installed in the cycle lane and causing them to be narrowed. That really boils down to working with the local authorities who are implementing these schemes and looking at a way that they can incorporate our products, offer a little bit more space, and that's why we have such a variety of widths in a range of our products. So the one orca or the mini orca or the one piece are ideal for that because they are so much narrower. So they will give you a lot more space within that cycle lane if you are implementing the products within it. And it's to do with the TSIGD guidelines. So it's lots of things. And one thing I'd like to just add is also there's question about refuge vehicles being able to clean cycle lanes and that side of things. We've done lots of trials and tests recently with local authorities, West Berkshire in particular, where we actually have video and things. So if anybody wanted particularly to ask us about that, then we can help on that as well.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. And we have a question for Tom, which I also saw that he answered, but if you want to just announce your answer, and that was the cost per location, at a location for a year.
Yeah, so I suppose the answer I gave in the chat was around about £2,500 to put something out a bit like this out on a sort of semi-permanent or permanent basis. But you then obviously got variations in terms of installation cost and what it costs to maintain, which will depend a bit, mostly on how many of them are going out in a given location. And then I suppose there's another factor which I don't always admit to everyone, which is we're a little bit obsessed with walking cycling schemes, so we will tend to charge a bit less for things that we like as opposed to things that we don't like. Although don't tell that to anyone building a motorway. I'm sure we'd be overjoyed to sell them stuff just a little bit more expensive than we might for a traffic filter.
Thank you, Tom. And Anthony, there's been a few questions. How are they put in place? And then Kathy has asked, what's the approximate cost corral for, say, 6 to 10 bikes?
Yeah, so I'll just answer those questions first. So all just like our temporary, our car bike ports and the other freestanding cycle racks we've been doing before, we've always just bolted them into the tarmac or into the curb. And that's secure enough. It just means you don't really need to damage the road surface too much, and they're relatively easy to remove. So they're all bolted down. Cost-wise, like a basic dockless corral starts at £570 just for the corral. So they're all kind of customizable, and we designed this so that you can add reflective panels, add the sign pole, so that when you combine it all, it can be quite cost-effective. But I think one of the things I want to point out is with all the pop-up solutions we've been seeing, I think it's very important that they also give an impression that it's not just a temporary, a flimsy solution, because something that looks flimsy will also attract vandalism and give a negative feeling about it. Just like an example, some of the planters that were used in low traffic neighborhoods, because they look relatively small, so then people have a go and try and move them or try and vandalize them. So sometimes having something that's a bit bigger, maybe a different material, something that looks like it should be there permanently will mean it's going to be respected and not vandalized. And finally, just the point on a lot of things we're doing, it's all about being creative with space and trying to put multiple things in limited space. So some councils have been putting charging points. I think Hackney have been putting charging points on lamp columns. So if we can find ways to integrate all these different services into several things into one product, that's a great way to try and save space, reduce cluster on the pavement, and just make our streets much smarter.
Thanks, Anthony. And we have 3 minutes left before we all turn into pumpkins. So I'm just going to go around the virtual room, and if you can just share, just one final thought. Laurence, I'll start with you, Laurence.
So Juliana's asked a good question in the chat, which is around practical support to help implement the RTPI recommendations. Essentially, there's more recommendations in the report, and I think they go broadly across, the things we need from national government and things we need to do locally. In the appendix, there is a toolkit which I think is quite useful, which is quantifying all of the research in terms of what interventions might mean. And then I think the key thing is those powers at a national government level.
Thanks so much, Laurence. Sam, final words.
Yeah, final words. I mean, there's been a lot of talk today, really, really interesting presentations around language and storytelling and people, and the importance of, and the single biggest thing arguably being the narrative that we use around active travel, encouraging people to cycle. And we heard from Will Norman around his comment, the best thing that cities can do is get bollards down. That's all great. I think also it's really important not to forget the impact that we can have through behaviour change and encouraging those people who are the next group of riders to jump on their bikes and supporting them, especially now. The stars are aligned at the moment, as we all know, for some of this stuff. And if we don't grab this opportunity, we'll have missed a massive trick. So, yeah, that's it. Keep doing the good work, people.
Thanks so much, Sam. And over to you, Tom.
Well, yeah, I suppose just there's going to be a lot of hard work this year. It's a mentally tough period anyway right now. So I think the key really is that we all keep communicating, sharing knowledge, sharing experience from what's worked and what hasn't worked over the last year. So I just encourage everyone to keep doing that, really.
Thank you. And Jeanette.
I think one of the things that was really key for things that happened last year was, the need for consultation, to work with the local communities to really hone what we want to implement and how we want to implement it. And then by that way, if you've got the community on board, it's going to offer exactly what they want and provide safety for families to get out there, enjoy the cycling, and and walking as well, and just benefit from everything that we're putting all this hard work into.
Thanks, Jeanette. And Anthony.
Yeah, I think we need to use this opportunity to really transform our cities, and the space is there. It can be done. If you look at Holland, Amsterdam, it's full of cars in the 70s, and look where it is today. So I think we just need to be bold and do those trials, and also make sure they're high quality and long lasting.
Thank you so much to our panel and our colleagues at Landor for helping on the tech side and organizing the summit. Really interesting speakers today, and yes, be bold, I think is the big message here. Be bold and let's do the good work, and it's all worth it. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of conference and enjoy your day.
Thanks,
Bye.
Hannah.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.